Hello, fourth grade, and welcome to the beginning of Unit 4. We're going to be starting Unit 4, Week 1 this week, and we're going to begin with our vocabulary words as usual. Our first word is the word privilege. So someone who has a privilege has a special right or a benefit that not everyone else has. So one example sentence says, a Roman citizen's privilege was being the only ones in the empire who could wear a toga. So if you weren't a Roman citizen, you weren't allowed to wear a toga. That was something that was reserved or kept specially just for them. Your next word is the word version. Version is a change that's made to fit a new situation. So if you have a new version of something, that means you've taken the original thing and you've modified it, or you've made changes to it so it fits better in the new situation. So you can have a different version of a game. For example, if you have to modify the game, if you have more players than usual or less players than usual, you may have a different version of a story that changes maybe some of the characters or something about how the story ends. Your next word is the word compromise. When you compromise, you're making an agreement where each side is giving up a little bit of what they want to find kind of like an equal middle ground where both sides get some of what they want, but not everything. So when you compromise, you're giving up a little bit and the other person is giving up a little bit to find something that's fair for the both of you. Next, we have the word amendments. Amendments are changes that are made to a law or to an agreement. When you amend something, you're changing it or you're adding things to it. So the Bill of Rights has amendments to the Constitution. It's making small changes and additions to it. And that's what an amendment is. Next, we have the word commitment. Commitment is an obligation to something. So when you commit to doing something, that means you're saying, this is what I'm going to do. You're giving your word. So commitment is an obligation. So it's making it your responsibility. Next, we have the word eventually. When we say something is going to happen eventually, that means it's going to happen after a period of time. So it's not happening right now. But for example, you can say, if you practice playing an instrument, eventually you're going to become really good at it. So this is saying that it's going to happen after a certain amount of time. Or a new kid moves in next door and we used to see each other all the time and eventually we became friends. Next, we have the word democracy. Democracy is a system of government where the citizens or the people there decide what happens. So they vote for things or they select their leaders. So the Greeks invented democracy. It's a system that we also use in the United States. Legislation is just a fancy way of saying laws. So legislations are laws. So if we're talking about legislations regarding or about driving, we're talking about laws about driving. It's just a fancy word to say the same thing. All right, next we're going to talk about our spelling words for this week, and we're going to be focusing on inflectional endings. Now, inflectional endings are things like ed or ing that are added to the end of a word. And they usually help to determine the tense. So if you're talking about past tense or present tense. We have the words tasted, ripping, forced, flipping, tapped, flipped, scared, flagged, ripped, skipped, tapping, saved, skipping, scaring, flagging, discussed, saving, tasting, forcing, discussing, bedspread, desktop, snowstorm, outwitted, and underscoring. Now, there are specific rules that you're going to focus on before we get into the pronouns. Let's take a moment to focus on our spelling words. Now, the base word for the word tasted is the word taste, T-A-S-T-E. It ends with a silent E. So if I want to add the ed ending, I'm going to be dropping that final E and adding an ed. If I have the word ripping, that comes from the word rip. There's no silent E at the end of it. So what I'm going to do is, since it ends with that letter P, I'm going to double that letter P before adding the ing. So if you don't double it, we know that there was a silent E in that word. If you do double it, you know that there was no silent E. So if there's no silent E, we know the vowel sound was short. If there is a silent E, we know that vowel sound is long. And we are going to get into that later in our notes, but I wanted you to pay attention to it when you're looking at your words. It's a difference between pronouncing a word as hopping or hoping. Now, if I have hopping, H-O-P-P-I-N-G, as opposed to hoping, H-O-P-I-N-G, that double letter helps you understand whether you're going to pronounce it with a short vowel sound or a long vowel sound. Now let's talk about pronouns. Now, pronoun is a word that takes the place of one or more noun, and there are different kinds of pronouns. So this week we're going to focus on 3 different kinds of pronouns. We're going to talk about personal pronouns, indefinite pronouns, and relative pronouns. So we're going to go through each one of those one at a time and explain them. A personal pronoun refers to a person or a thing, such as I, he, she, it, or you. It takes the place of the name of that noun. So instead of saying Hassan will go to the park, I can say he will go to the park. That is a personal pronoun. We replace the proper noun Hassan with the pronoun he. If I say Miss Aina is giving a grammar lesson, I'm going to replace my name and I'm going to say I am giving a grammar lesson. So I replaced my name with the pronoun I. If I say Humaira built a time machine, I can change that and say she built a time machine. So I'm replacing the name Humaira with the proper noun, with the pronoun she. So I took out the proper noun and I replaced it with the pronoun. If I say the San Diego Zoo has a new exhibit, I can say it has a new exhibit. So I'm replacing the proper noun, the San Diego Zoo, with the pronoun it. I can also say, will Shadia teach us how to bake a fancy cake? If I'm talking to Shadia, I can replace her name with the pronoun you. Will you teach us how to bake a fancy cake? So I replace that pronoun. I replace that proper noun with a pronoun. So those are personal pronouns. I, he, she, it, or you. Now, when we're talking about indefinite pronouns, indefinite means not definite. We're not naming a specific person, place, or thing like we do with personal pronouns. These could be words such as anyone, or everything, or nobody, or somewhere, or someone. They can be singular or they can be plural. So we're not talking about a specific person, place, or thing. That's what makes them indefinite. You're not defining a specific person, place, or thing. So has anyone seen my ELA book? Please give everyone a cookie after class. The science teacher said, please don't touch anything in the lab without permission. Everyone is going to the park after school. So you see how we're not referring to a specific person or place or thing. We're talking in general, right? We're not giving a definite person, place, or thing. It is indefinite or not specific. Now, next we have relative pronouns. A relative pronoun is used at the beginning of a dependent clause. Remember, we've talked about independent clauses, which are basically simple sentences, and dependent clauses, which are parts of a sentence that can't be a whole sentence by themselves. They're missing information. So a relative pronoun is used at the beginning of a dependent clause, such as the words that, which, who, whom, or whose. They're called relative pronouns because they always relate back to something or someone else. They're used to join 2 sentences that are talking about the same person or thing. So relative pronouns take the place of nouns or pronouns, and they're called relative, again, because they always relate back to something or someone else in the sentence, usually in the same sentence, sometimes in the next sentence or the previous sentence, but they're generally in the same sentence. So the word who, the pronoun who, we use it to replace the subjects I, she, he, we, and they when we're talking about the subject pronouns. So this is the man who broke the window. So who is referring to the man. Whose shows possession or relationship. She knew the family whose house we bought. So we're talking about the family that owned that home previously, right? We're talking about possession or ownership. Whom replaces an object pronoun. So who replaces a subject pronoun? Whom replaces an object pronoun such as me, her, him, us, and them. So remember, object pronouns come towards the end of the sentence, subject pronouns come towards the beginning of the sentence. So they have found the lady whom they wanted to interview. So the whom that we're talking about is the lady they wanted to interview. That's in the later part of the sentence. We also have the pronoun which. Now, clauses that begin with the word which are almost always non-restrictive. What does that mean? My precious blue lamp, comma, which was in the room, was broken. So here, it's providing you with additional information as well. So which is talking about things. It's not talking about people. Next, we have the word that. So clauses that begin with that are almost always restrictive clauses. So the non-restrictive, those ones are kind of separated by commas on their own. The restrictive clauses do not have commas in them. The lamp that was in the room was broken. Now, a pronoun must match its antecedent or the noun that it's referring to, both in number and in gender. Remember, an antecedent is the thing that that pronoun is talking about. Now, what does that look like? So if I say, Hamza will finish his homework, I can't say they will finish his homework. I have to say he will finish his homework. So it has to match in number and in gender. So he is a singular male, right? Hamza, singular male. If I say Mizena students are working on a project, I can't say she are working, I say they are working on a project. So it's matching in number, so it's plural. And there's no gender here because we're talking about a group. So you have to make sure that your sentences make sense. When you substitute a pronoun in, you have to make sure you are using the correct one. Now, antecedents, we said, usually appear in the same sentence as their pronouns, but not always. So grandma taught me how to make her famous cookies. So I have to, again, matching in number and gender. So grandma is my subject. And when I refer to her using a pronoun, I use the pronoun her because she's a female and one female. So my one grandma taught me how to make her famous cookies. So again, matching in gender, which is and number, so singular and female. Next, I can say the actors played their parts very well. So actors is plural, so I have to use a plural pronoun, their. So it has to match in number. And when we're talking about plural, we're not talking about gender specifically. We're not talking about a boy or a girl. We're talking about a group. I can say the heavy book fell on the floor. It did not make a loud sound like I expected. Now here we have two sentences. Our antecedent is in the first sentence and our pronoun is in the second sentence, but they still have to match because I'm talking about the same thing. I'm still talking about the heavy book. If I'm talking about one book and it's a thing, I use the pronoun it, right? It is referring to a singular thing. Even though it's in the next sentence, I'm still referring back to that same antecedent, that same noun that was in the first sentence. And next, my next example sentence says, our dog Spot is a collie. He is very playful. So again, two sentences. The antecedent is in the first sentence. The pronoun is in the second sentence. It has to match in number and in gender. Spot is my one boy dog. So I use the pronoun he. Now, another mistake that will come up a lot of times in writing that I want you guys to pay close attention to is when you're talking about more than one subject. You have more than one noun going on and you use a pronoun. If it's not clear which one of those nouns your pronoun is referring to, repeat the noun, repeat the name of that thing. So instead of saying, although Salma and Sarah like to draw unicorns, she is not very good at it. Who am I referring to? Which one of them is not good at it? Who is the she in this sentence? Are we talking about Sarah or are we talking about Salma? In this case, I want to repeat the name or the noun that I'm referring to, and then I want to rewrite my sentence so it's clear to my reader who I'm referring to. Although Salma and Sarah like to draw unicorns, Salma is not very good at it. This is very clear now because I know that both girls like to do it. One of them is better at it than the other one. If I say, Sam pushed his sister and did not apologize, this bothered her. Okay, which part bothered her? Was getting pushed the part that bothered her, or the fact that he did it and he didn't apologize bother her? This is where we repeat what happened. Sam pushed his sister. It bothered her when he did not apologize. So I'm rewriting it so that my sentence makes sense. I want to make sure my sentences are clear. So if you have more than one noun, make sure you're clarifying which one you're referring to with your pronoun. If it can't be clear by using the pronoun, repeat the noun. And the last thing, or one of the last things we're going to talk about, are Latin roots. So we talked about Greek roots already. Many of the root words that we have in the English language come from Latin and Greek. We're going to focus on some of the Latin ones this week. So we have the Latin root word commune, which means common, or you find it in the word community, people who live in a common area. When you communicate, right, you're using a common language to speak to people. Next, we have the root mem, meaning to remember, so memory or remember. Nat, meaning to be from something, so from nature or natural. Scrib means to write. To scribble, right, means you're writing kind of in a messy way. A scribe is someone who writes down important documents. And these were people that were around mostly before we had like proper printing presses and things like that. A scribe would be the person who would write these important things down when important decisions and laws were made. A scribe is a record keeper. And we have the root spect. Spect means to look. So a spectator is someone who's looking and watching. Spectacles are another word for glasses that you wear. Now, when we're talking about those inflectional endings, back to our spelling words for the week, we have a couple of rules that we need to follow. So inflectional endings are ending parts that are added to the end of a base word to show tense or when something is happening, right? Tense tells us either past or present. If the word ends with a vowel plus the letter Y, you only add the ed or the ing. So stay becomes stayed or staying. We will stay, he stayed, they are staying. You only add the ed or the ing if it's a vowel plus the letter Y. Now, if it ends with a consonant and a letter Y, you change that Y to an I before adding the ed or the ing. So carry becomes carried, C-A-R-R-I-E-D, or C-A-R-R, only when you're adding the ed, you change it to an I. When you're adding an ing, you don't change it, C-A-R-R-Y-I-N-G. And I have a table set up over here to show you guys when those base words, specifically the first table shows you base words that do not have a silent E. The second table shows you base words that do have a silent E. So wash becomes washed or washing. Talk becomes talked or talking. Play is a vowel plus Y. So we just add the ed and the ing, played or playing. Enjoy, again, is a vowel plus Y. So enjoyed or enjoying. We're just adding the ed or ing. Cry has a consonant Y. So to make it past tense, cried, we change the Y to an I before adding the ed or the ing. But crying has no change. We just add the ing. Study follows the same rule. The Y at the end of study, since it's a consonant Y, becomes a consonant I, then ed. Or studying, the base word stays the same and you just add the ing. Now, if we have a base word that does have a silent E, so like the word save, you drop the silent E and you add the ed, or you drop the silent E and you add the ing. So save becomes saved or saving. Bake becomes baked or baking. Notice how we drop the silent E before we put that inflectional ending. Chase becomes chased or chasing. And the last bit we're going to talk about are vowel teams. So when we have vowel team syllables, remember each syllable in a word has a vowel sound in it. Vowel teams are two or more letters that work together to make one vowel sound. And the letters Y and W can be part of a vowel team. This is something that's important to remember in different words. Now, because vowel teams make a singular a single vowel sound, we do not break them into separate syllables. They stay together because it's only making one sound, even though it's more than one letter together. So some common vowel teams are AI, like complain, afraid, entertain, male. You notice that vowel team, that AI doesn't get separated into separate into separate syllables. It stays together because it makes one sound, it's staying together. OA, like floating or rowboat or coat, those also have a singular sound, so they stay in the same syllable. OW, like in pillow or blow or tower. AY, like in playful, daydream, tray or clay. EA, as in read or leader or fleas or repeat. Again, one vowel sound, even though it's made up of more than one letter, so it doesn't get separated because it's just the one sound. Then we have EE, like needle, feeding, freedom, or unseen. So remember, vowel teams do not get broken up into separate syllables. They stay together in their syllable. Now let's get into our literature anthology book, and we're going to be reading the story, See How They Run.
Genre: narrative nonfiction. See How. They Run by Susan E. Goodman, illustrated by Elwood H. Smith. A Short History of Democracy. The Beginnings. When was the first election? It's impossible to tell. For all we know, people voted in prehistoric times. Flint, Flint, he's our man. If he can't cave paint, no one can. Elect Grog, keeper of the flame. A vote for Homo sapiens is a vote for progress. Early people may have had elections. We just can't be sure. They didn't have a written language, so they couldn't leave us records, let alone campaign posters or bumper stickers. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. The ancient Greeks get credit for inventing democracy, probably because they had the best word for it. The demo part comes from demos, which means the people. Cracy comes from kratian, meaning to rule. Rule by the people. Starting in 510 BC, the citizens of Athens, Greece, gathered in the assembly and voted on important community issues. Each one had an equal voice in deciding what would happen. This was the purest democracy of all time. Sort of. Only adult males, born in Athens with Athenian parents, could be citizens with full legal rights. That meant only 1 out of 8 Athenians could vote on decisions that affected all their lives. There's no place like Rome. Around the same time, and a little to the west, the city of Rome began working on its version of democracy. That is, when its citizens or armies weren't too busy conquering everyone else around them. Roman democracy was different from the Greek version, in which ordinary citizens voted on major issues. Instead, Romans voted to pick the people who would make the decisions for them. They elected senators, who held their jobs for life. They also elected leaders called consuls, who controlled the army and created laws. But a Roman citizen's best privilege was being the only one in the empire who could wear a toga. Eventually, Roman leaders became a little too power-hungry. Julius Caesar got himself declared dictator for life. Augustus took the title of emperor. Then he went all out and declared himself a god. So far, our presidents have shown more self-control. A place in history. Talk about power. Both Julius Caesar and Augustus named months after themselves, July and August. 1,800 years later, here comes American democracy. George Washington and the rest of our founding fathers borrowed bits and pieces from past democracies to create our own. They named our Senate after the Roman Senate. They adopted a British idea from the 13th century, saying that the government must respect a citizen's legal rights. George and his crew wanted a government where people had some say in how to rule the country, but not too much. They didn't trust all their fellow Americans, especially those without much education. So they rejected the Greek method of having citizens vote directly on laws. Decisions would be made by people who represented the citizens instead, just like in the Roman Republic. Stop and check. Ask and answer questions. Why did the Founding Fathers reject the Greek method of voting? Go back to the text to find the answer. In 1787, the Founding Fathers locked themselves up for 4 months to write our Constitution. Coming up with this description of our new government wasn't easy. They all had different ideas and had to compromise. George Washington's face often wore its Valley Forge look. Here's what they came up with: a national government with 3 branches. Our Congress, the legislative branch, has 2 parts or houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Congress can make laws to raise taxes, improve citizens' lives, and defend the country. The President heads the executive branch. He, and someday soon, maybe she, carries out laws and is head of the military. He also appoints judges to the Supreme Court, part of our judicial branch. The court's job is to enforce existing laws and decide if the other 2 branches are obeying the Constitution. What did Ben say? Shortly after the Constitutional Convention ended, a woman asked Benjamin Franklin what kind of government the Founding Fathers created. Franklin's answer? A republic, madam, if you can keep it. In other words, our kind of government needs citizens who care enough to stay informed and take part. In other words, vote. Getting better all the time. Is the Constitution a perfect plan? Nope, but the people who wrote it were smart enough to know that. They improved it right away by writing the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, additions, to the Constitution. We've been making it better ever since. The good news. The United States was the first modern democracy with an elected government protecting the freedom and rights of its citizens. The bad news. In the beginning, only white men who owned land could vote. The good news. In 1856, white men who didn't own land got that right. The bad news. Everyone else was still left out in the cold. Changing beliefs and values isn't easy. It takes lots of thought and struggle. The good news. African American and other non-white men began voting in 1870. The bad news. People's beliefs and values changed too slowly. An African American's right to vote was often denied in the South and parts of the North until the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. The good news. American women of all races got the vote in 1920. The bad news. Women in New Zealand, Australia, Finland, Norway, Canada, Estonia, England, Ireland, the Soviet Union, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Germany, Hungary, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Poland, Luxembourg, and Holland were able to vote before them. At least the United States beat Switzerland, where women couldn't vote until 1971. The good news. Native Americans began voting in 1924. The bad news. Seems like a long wait, given that they were here first. What's more, some states banned them from voting until the 1940s. The good news. In 1971, the voting age was reduced to 18 years old. The bad news. You've still got a while before you can vote. The good news. You have other ways to make your opinion heard. Keep reading to find out what they are. Uncle Sam wants you. RX for voting. When people are involved with their communities, their knowledge of politics grows. Their interest and commitment does too. That's true for kids as well as grown-ups. Okay, you aren't old enough to vote, not even close, but you can still have a voice in our democracy. 4 million kids already cast ballots on Election Day. They're part of a program called Kids Voting USA in schools in 28 states and Washington, D.C. True, their votes aren't counted in official tallies, but they're announced in schools and on local TV stations. This program has another advantage. Kids get so excited that 3 to 5% more of their parents end up voting too. That's where you come in, even if Kids Voting USA isn't in your school. You can make sure your parents are registered to vote, and you can make sure they actually do it. How? Oh, come on. How do you get your parents to do anything? Drive you somewhere, buy a new game, let you stay up late? You bug them. So bug them about voting. Plaster a countdown calendar on the front door. Put reminders on their voicemail. Email too. If they say they're too tired on the big day, try a bribe. It works when they want something from you. Offer to do the dishes if they go, but only if you're desperate. Stop and check. Ask and answer questions. How does the Kids Voting USA program encourage people to vote? Go back to the text to find the answer. Kids to the rescue. Bugging your parents is a good first step. Some kids are going even further. They are identifying issues and working on them. A recent report found that 55% of American kids volunteer. That's almost twice as many as adults. Kids are becoming leaders. Talk about bugging. A group of second graders decided that Massachusetts needed an official state insect. When they learned that any state resident could give legislators ideas for new laws, they got busy. Maybe it was the ladybug costumes they wore while visiting the state capitol. Maybe it was their speech saying ladybugs could be found all over the state. Whatever the reason, the legislature approved their bill and the government signed a law proclaiming the ladybug as Massachusetts' state insect. Third and fourth graders did something similar for New Hampshire, which didn't have a state fruit. The hardest thing about that process was convincing legislators that the pumpkin is a fruit. At age 7, Shadia Wood learned that the Superfund bill would clean up New York's worst toxic waste sites. For 7 years, Shadia and a group called Kids Against Pollution tried to convince lawmakers to pass this bill. She had a lemonade stand on the steps of the state capitol, selling drinks and toxic dump cake. Then, she'd send the profits to the governor to help pay for the Superfund. Eventually, TV and newspaper reporters noticed what she was doing. The Superfund bill became law in 2003. There's nothing wrong with shaming grown-ups into good behavior. Imagine getting $135 to skip school and do good work. When Massachusetts governor signed a bill to let 16 and 17-year-olds work at the polls, Boston-based students began helping voters with computerized equipment on Election Day. It's a win-win-win-win situation. Kids know computers better than many adult voters. They get involved with voting. They get money. They are also being trained for the job. Our country will need them soon. The average poll worker is currently 72 years old. In Boise, Idaho, kids ages 15 and up are on committees governing the city. Some towns, like Linesville, Pennsylvania, have had 18-year-old mayors. Mayor at 18 seems pretty great. But in California, Ohio, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin, an 18-year-old can be governor. Sending a message. If you see a problem in your community or have an idea of how to make things better, get active. Give a government leader a piece of your mind. The best part, please. Speak up at a town meeting. Invite your mayor or another official to speak to your class about an important issue. Be ready to ask good questions and give your opinions. Set up a class trip to visit him or her. Write a letter or email that identifies a problem. Tell how the problem affects you and your community. Write about the changes you'd like to see. Send your letter to the appropriate official in your town or to your state representative and senator, or to your representative and senator in Congress, or even to the governor or president. Write a letter and get people who agree with you to sign it too. Make sure you write your names and addresses clearly. Make a survey about the problem, write it up, and send it to the right official. Stop and check. Summarize. How can kids make their voices heard about community issues? The birth of American democracy. Every 4th of July, Americans celebrate the birthday of the United States. Fireworks and parades remind us that the 13 colonies declared independence from Great Britain on July 4, 1776. That birthday took place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There, the Second Continental Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. This document formed a new nation, the United States of America. The Declaration is almost like our country's original birthday card. Our Founding Fathers. 5 men, including John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, wrote the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson wrote the first draft. His famous words sum up a basic American belief: all men are created equal. The men who signed the Declaration are called the Founding Fathers of our country. Signing the Declaration put the founders' lives in danger. They knew that their signatures made them traitors to Great Britain. They also knew that if the colonies won the war, their names would go down in history. Led by General George Washington, the colonists fought passionately for their freedom. After a long, bloody war, the British surrendered in 1781, and a peace treaty was signed in 1783. Our new nation was still a work in progress, however. Americans disagreed about how much power a federal or central government should have. Given that they had just won freedom from a powerful British king, Americans did not want their government to have too much power. The Constitutional Convention. In 1787, the states were like separate countries. Each state printed its own money and made its own trade laws. The national government was weak and in debt from the war. In May 1787, each state sent delegates, people who represent others, to Philadelphia to attend a meeting called the Constitutional Convention. The delegates were to create a new plan for our government. George Washington was chosen as the president of the convention. One young delegate, James Madison, proposed ideas. After many debates, he compromised with the other delegates on the United States Constitution as the plan for our government. Thus, today, James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution. Delegates from large and small states argued most about the power to pass legislation or laws. States with large populations wanted more votes in a legislature. Small states did not think this was fair. By September of 1787, the states agreed on a system of checks and balances known as the 3 branches of government. In this system, no branch has too much power. The 3 branches. The legislative branch, or Congress, is made up of the Senate and House of Representatives. Congress passes laws. Small states liked the Senate because each state, large or small, got 2 senators. In the House, a state's population determines the number of representatives. Chart. 3 branches of government. The legislative branch creates laws. Includes Congress, House of Representatives, Senate. The executive branch carries out laws. Includes President, Vice President, Cabinet members. The judicial branch settles disputes about laws. Includes Supreme Court, lower federal courts. The President heads the executive branch. The President can sign, veto, and enforce laws. The President also commands the nation's military. The judicial branch is the third branch. The highest court is called the Supreme Court. District, state, and federal courts determine whether a law follows the Constitution. The Constitution was officially approved in September 1787, but it did not become the law of the nation right away. Why? It had to be ratified or approved by 9 of the 13 states. Some states held out. They felt the Constitution did not give enough power to the people. They wanted to add amendments or changes that guaranteed important personal rights such as freedom of speech or religion. James Madison jumped in again. He wrote the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. These were added to the Constitution in 1791. Finally, our nation had a plan of government that was approved. All the people. Our Constitution begins with the words, "We the people." Back in 1791, however, the Constitution gave certain rights, such as voting, only to some people. That has changed over time. Today, our Constitution grants all citizens over the age of 18 the right to vote. Politicians continually revisit this founding document to ensure that all people are treated equally in our democracy. Make connections. Why did delegates from the states meet to write a constitution in 1787? Why is it important to be an active participant in our democracy? Use details from the selection to explain.
That takes us to the end of our selections in our literature anthologies. I know those were quite long, so please make sure you are reviewing those those selections, because they will be in your weekly selection tests. Make sure you have your book open while you're doing those tests. Read the questions first and then go over the reading to help you find the answers. Let's get into our reading and writing workshop stories.
Genre, narrative nonfiction. A world without rules. Essential question. Why do we need government? Read how government and laws help to protect us every day. You may sometimes wonder if rules were made to keep you from having fun and to tell you what to do. But what if we had no rules at all? Nobody would tell you what to do ever again. Sounds great, right? Well, let's see what it's like to inhabit a world without rules. You just might change your mind. A strange morning. Let's start at home. Your alarm clock goes off. Why hurry? Without rules, you don't have to go to school. Eventually, you wander downstairs and find your little brother eating cookies in the kitchen. Since there are no rules, you can have cookies for breakfast. But you wonder if you should have something sensible like a bowl of cereal. You reach a compromise. Compromise. And crumble the cookies over your cereal. In this new world, you will not have to brush your teeth anymore. Of course, the next time you see the dentist, you may have a cavity. A community in confusion. Now you step outside. You decide to go to the playground because there's no law saying you have to go to school. No crossing guard stands at the corner to help you across the street. Without traffic laws, cars zip by at an alarming speed, honking at each other, and there is not a police officer in sight. There is no safe alternate way to cross the street. Besides, once you see the playground, You may decide it is not worth the risk of getting hit by a car. Broken swings dangle from rusty chains. Trash cans overflow with plastic bottles, snack wrappers, and paper bags. A huge tree branch lies across the sliding board. As a result of all state and federal services being gone, nobody is in charge of taking care of the playground. Now think about trying to do all the other things you love. Want to go to the beach? The lifeguards will not be there to keep you safe. Want to play soccer in the park? Your state and local governments are not around to maintain the parks, so you'll never find a place to play. Feel like eating lunch outside? As a result of pollution, the air quality is so bad that you will probably have to wear a gas mask every day. Have you ever thought about our country being invaded by another country? Remember, the government runs the army. Without the government, there is no army to protect us if another country decided to take over our country. Back to reality. Thankfully, that version of our world isn't real. We live in a democracy. De-moc-ra-cy, where we have the privilege of voting for the people that we want to run the country. Our elected government passes legislation. Leg is lation, or laws meant to help and protect us. If the country outgrows an old law, then the government can pass amendments to the law. Community workers such as crossing guards, police officers, and lifeguards all work to keep you safe, while government agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency have made a commitment to inspect the air and water for pollution. And don't forget the armed forces, which were created to protect our nation. Our government and laws were designed to keep you safe and ensure you are treated as fairly as everyone else. Without them, the world would be a different place. Make connections. Talk about how government helps us maintain order and helps preserve our freedom. What are some ways that the government protects you every day?
All right, next let's get into our comprehension strategy and skill. Now this week, again, we're going to focus on asking and answering questions. And like we said before, this helps us to get a better understanding of what the author is trying to tell us, and it helps us to find information that we may have missed or didn't understand the first time we read through.
Ask and answer questions. When you read informational text, you may come across facts and ideas that are new to you. Stop and ask yourself questions to help you understand and remember the information. Then read the text closely to find the answers. Find text evidence. When you first read the Back to Reality section in A World Without Rules, you may have asked yourself what role the Environmental Protection Agency has in keeping people safe. Back to reality. Thankfully, that version of our world isn't real. We live in a democracy, de-moc-ra-cy, where we have the privilege of voting for the people that we want to run the country. Our elected government passes legislation. Leg is slation, or laws meant to help and protect us. If the country outgrows an old law, then the government can pass amendments to the law. Community workers such as crossing guards, police officers, and lifeguards all work to keep you safe, while government agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency have made a commitment to inspect the air and water for pollution. And don't forget the armed forces, which were created to protect our nation. Our government and laws were designed to keep you safe and ensure you are treated as fairly as everyone else. Without them, the world would be a different place. As I read on, I found the answer to my question. The Environmental Protection Agency's role is to inspect our air and water and make sure that they are clean. Cause and effect. Authors use text structure to organize the information in a nonfiction work. Cause and effect is one kind of text structure. A cause is why something happens. An effect is what happens. Signal words such as because, so, since, and as a result can help you identify cause and effect relationships. Find text evidence. When I reread the section A Strange Morning on page 239, I will look for causes and effects. I will also look for signal words. Graphic organizer. Cause. Effect. Cause, without rules. Effect, you don't have to go to school. Cause, without rules. Effect, you can have cookies for breakfast. Cause, you don't have to brush your teeth. Effect, you can get a cavity. Caption, the effect is what happens as a result of an action. Narrative nonfiction. A World Without Rules is narrative nonfiction. Narrative nonfiction is told in the form of a story, may express the author's opinion about the subject, presents facts, and includes text features. Find text evidence. A World Without Rules is narrative nonfiction. The author tells a story and includes text features. The author also expresses an opinion and supports it with facts and examples. Text features. Boldface words. Boldface words show key words in the text. Pronunciations. Pronunciations show how to sound out unfamiliar words. Latin roots. Knowing Latin roots can help you figure out the meanings of unfamiliar words. Look for these Latin roots as you read A World Without Rules. Dent equals tooth. Commune equals common. Spect equals look. Find text evidence. When I read the third paragraph on page 239 in the section A Strange Morning, I see the word alternate. The Latin root alter means other. This will help me figure out what alternate means. There is no safe, alternate way to cross the street.
All right, that takes us to the end of our language arts notes, 4th grade. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.